the Littell was unusual because they asked, I guess, 5 translators for samples. They asked us all for a 15-page sample and of different parts of the book. And so we sent the sample in, and the sample was sent to Littell, Jonathan Burnham, who's the head of HarperCollins, and then the English, the UK, and the Canadian publishers. So all of them were, and they were sent anonymously, so the translator's name wasn't attached to the excerpts. And then Jonathan Littell had the final say into whatever section he liked the best, and he liked my excerpt the best. He said it was the most like Max's voice, or what he imagined about Max's voice. And so I was chosen anonymously out of, I guess, 5 or 6 samples or something. But that was an unusual case because he was American and he could read all of everything. He knew exactly what he wanted. So usually it varies actually. I'm either asked by a publisher if I'm interested in doing something. But this is actually the first book that I actually went out and found and really wanted to do, and I was so happy when you decided to do it. Because at the time that I was doing this, the excerpt, it had no publisher, and so I was really hoping that it would get a good publisher. So I was really happy when that I got it.
I feel very fortunate to have discovered this book in particular. It's a strange quirk in the way that American publishing works, that we're, being so small, are able to do such really important books.
It won 2 major prizes in France when it came out. It won the Prix Novembre and also the France Inter, which is a prize that's awarded by radio listeners. So it's 2 like major prizes in France.
I think I saw a video of him they announced the prize and he happened to be in town, and when they had sort of deliberations. Did you see this video?
Yeah.
It was very, very cute.
He flew in from Barcelona. He lives in Barcelona and he flew over to Paris. And, yeah.
I was also wondering, I know nobody else, probably besides the 2 of us, has read this in English, but you also translated Jonathan Littell, which is The Kindly Ones. And the books have a lot in common, both their subject matter and I guess the amount of research that went into them. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the way that you see them as being similar or different, either in the way that they were written or in the way that you had to sort of approach them as, after your first pass through, or just to say anything about them, because the books are so close to each other in a lot of ways. And it's really interesting that they came out so close to each other at the end of what must have been, a decade-long process to pull them together, I would assume.
Yeah, because it took Jonathan, I think, 5 years to write The Kindly Ones, and I think it took Mathias about longer than that to write this. I mean, he put a lot of work into this novel. Both the narrators are sort of fascist. Max is the narrator of The Kindly Ones is Nazi, and this narrator grew up as sort of right-wing Croatian fascist, and then he became sort of less right-wing as he grew older. And they're both about war, and this is about, all the wars that have been fought, as you said, like since the Trojan War. So, and as he's going through the countryside in Italy, he's remembering all the different battles that were fought in the various places in Italy that the train goes through. So yeah, they're both about war, and they're both very violent. But they both, I guess the thing that makes them a lot the same is the narrative. They're both narrated by a very compelling narrator, and the narrator's voice is really what pulls you along. So when you're reading the book, you're sort of caught up in this narrator, and especially in this because it's all him throughout the book. Except for there are some sections where he's reading a book on a train, and then that book that he's reading is reproduced in this book. So he rewrites the book, and those chapters have periods, and they're sentences. They're just like it's a normal book. So, and I think that was a really neat device actually to sort of reproduce it's a little like small book of stories that he's reading by a Lebanese author. Mostly they were sort of similar in that way. The narrator's voice. I had to. The main thing was just to try to get the voice of the narrator right, and then once I had that, then I could pretty much just go along. And that was the hardest thing with the kindly ones too, is to get Max's voice right.
Yeah, because he's a very officious kind of person, and the way he,
Yeah.
I mean, assuming that he wrote the story, the way he wrote it is very officious and very detailed, and
Yeah.
it's very stepwise. One thing leads to another, leads to another. And his own is different in that the narrator sort of follows the accident of his thought, and it'll lead from one place to another, and it always ends up circling back to war and to violence. But it's not as laser focused, I guess, as the Littell is.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It's a much more likable narrator. I mean, he's
Yeah.
not as despicable as the narrator of the kindly ones. And at the end of the kindly ones, he gets really, really hateful.
Yeah.
And this man gets a little nicer as it goes along, so
Yeah.
that's a little easier that way. It was hard for me to translate at the end of the kindly ones. So it's such a difficult book.
Well, I just wanted to open up for a few minutes to questions. I don't know if anybody wants to ask Charlotte anything.
Well, ask a quick question of clarification. The book of short stories you mentioned that is imported, is it an actual book or is it?
No, he made it up.
likes it
He
as well?
made up the book by a fictional Lebanese author named Raphael Kalla. And I Googled him to make sure that he was not real, but and it takes place during the Civil War in Lebanon. So that's another war that's going on as he's thinking about the Yugoslav war. He's still sort of caught up in the war that he was in, and then he's reading this book about the Lebanese war, and the two sort of get intertwined, and the book that he's reading sort of changes him also in a way. And the styles are very different. I mean, they're very short sentences with lots of periods. So I think actually he did that to give the reader a break too, because it does get sort of exhausting when you're reading it because there is nowhere to stop. So then these chapters are sort of interspersed throughout. I forget how many of them there are. I think there are 5, and then they're sort of scattered throughout the book. Like as he gets tired, he'll read a chapter, and then the chapter will appear.
It's a great device.
It is, yeah. It's really neat.
I was going to ask you about the rhythm of it because it seems almost like once you start reading, it's coming on a train, right?
Yeah.
So you hop on the train and you start reading. Is there any variety in the rhythm of the text, or is it all really the same kind of pattern?
It's all the same, pretty much. It's and it feels very train-like, and you get that sort of inevitable feeling where you just, as if you're on the train, like going on and on and on and on. No, it's all pretty much like that.
And I think that's the point of the little breaks, because you just need a
you
need a
need to
period,
stop.
you need a little bit of rest, and he gives you that with those short sections.
Yeah. It's hard to read out.
Yeah, I can't imagine how good.
I don't think I did a very good job.
Earlier on, you mentioned trying to stay faithful to the writing, and then just a moment ago, you talked about trying or wanting to get the voice right. Can you say something about how you do that? Is there some methodical way you do that, or is it a gut feeling, or how does that come?
It usually happens organically, like as I go along. With the kindly ones, it happened like about a quarter of the way through. I suddenly had him, like the narrator sort of started to inhabit me, and I actually started dreaming of him and having these dreams like of the book too, and different things happening in the book. It usually doesn't happen for a little while, and then once I have it, then it's there, and I have it for the rest of the book. With this one, it was easier because he doesn't change a lot. I mean, he's pretty much the same. As I said, he becomes a little nicer, but the narrative is pretty much the same. So I sort of had this like pretty much from the first chapter, but it got more convincing as I went along. And then when I revise, then I go back over the early parts and make sure that the early parts sound like the later parts.